Breaking. Keir Starmer just called you the enemy. Not criminals flooding Britain's streets. Not the chaos at your borders. Not the cost of living crisis crushing your family. You. The British voter who dares to disagree with him. He's flying across Europe right now, meeting with progressive leaders in Germany and France. And according to sources inside those meetings, they're discussing one thing: how to crush what they call the far-right threat. Translation: how to stop Reform UK, how to stop Nigel Farage, how to stop you from voting them out. This is the story the establishment prays you never hear. If this matters to you, hit subscribe right now, because this channel is about to get very uncomfortable for people in power. Let me be crystal clear about what just happened. In the first week of January 2026, Starmer gathered his cabinet for an emergency meeting. The message: work harder, deliver results. Because if you don't, we're finished. He called 2026 the year of proof. But here's what he's really terrified of. Reform UK now has more members than the Labour Party itself. Over 268,000 people have joined. A party with just 5 seats in Parliament has built a bigger grassroots army than the party running the entire country. And the polls? Reform leads Labour by double digits, 34% to 18% in some surveys. This isn't a protest vote anymore. This is a revolution brewing in real time. But Starmer's not talking about fixing immigration. He's not talking about the violent criminals he's releasing from prison. He's not talking about the 2-tier justice system that's made British policing a national joke. No, he's talking about fighting populism. And according to Zia Yusuf, chairman of Reform UK, that word has been weaponised beyond recognition. In a blistering televised interview, Yusuf laid it out. According to Starmer, if you believe in secure borders, you're far right. If you think violent criminals should stay in jail, you're far right. If you want the government to prioritise British citizens over foreign nationals, you're an extremist. He paused, then said, "If that's what far right means, then God help us all." Let that sink in. Wanting your government to protect its own people is now considered radical extremism. Now let's talk about what Starmer's government is actually doing while you're labelled a threat. His Justice Secretary released tens of thousands of criminals early because prisons were full. The government swore these were non-violent offenders. That was a lie. Lawson Natty supplied the machete used to murder 14-year-old Gordon Galt in Newcastle. He served months, then walked free under early release. Gordon's mother, Dion Barrett, got a letter in the mail telling her that one of the people responsible for her son's death was back on the streets. She said she felt robbed of justice. Meanwhile, Adam Andrews shook a baby so violently the child is now blind and paralysed. He was released early too. These are the people Starmer's government chose to free, while telling you the prisons were simply too full. But here's where it gets darker. After 3 children were murdered in Southport last summer, riots broke out. People posted offensive content online. Courts sat through weekends. Arrests happened within hours. Starmer deployed what he called a standing army of police to crush the disorder. Swift justice, he said. Zero tolerance for thuggery. But just 2 weeks earlier, a riot exploded in Hare Hills, Leeds. Social services tried to take children from a Roma family. A mob gathered. A police car was flipped. A bus was torched. Multiple vehicles burned. And the police did something remarkable. They retreated. They left the scene. Officers were outnumbered, so they withdrew and let the rioters tire themselves out. No weekend courts, no dawn raids, no performative BBC footage of doors being kicked in. The next day, Leeds City Council issued a statement praising the Roma community's contribution to the diversity and richness of the area. Former Metropolitan Police Detective Mike Neville called it the ultimate display of 2-tier policing. And he's not wrong. Look at Notting Hill Carnival. 2 people murdered, 8 stabbed, over 300 arrested, 61 police officers assaulted, 1 sexually assaulted. A Metropolitan Police Federation survey found 89% of officers didn't feel safe working the event. They described it as hell, a war zone, lambs to the slaughter, yet it continues every single year because criticising it is politically unacceptable. Compare that to football fans banned from central London during the Euro final against Spain. No crime committed, no violence, just the presumption that drunk supporters might cause trouble. Thousands of British citizens were denied access to their own capital, but at an event where people are actually murdered and stabbed, no restrictions. And while he lectures you about threats to democracy, he's quietly dismantling the biggest democratic vote in British history. Brexit. In his first major interview of 2026, Starmer admitted, Britain should seek closer alignment with the EU single market. He announced Britain would rejoin the Erasmus student exchange programme. £570 million for just 1 year. He hinted at a youth mobility scheme that could grant 80 million Europeans the right to live and work in Britain. When pressed on whether this meant freedom of movement was returning, he insisted it wasn't. But everyone watching knew exactly what was happening. The door is opening, and once it opens, it never closes. Shadow Foreign Secretary Priti Patel called it what it is: Brexit betrayal. Nigel Farage went further. He called it a breach of good faith with Labour voters. He said the Brexit betrayal was speeding up, pointing to agreements to follow EU net zero rules as disasters for British industry. Starmer is systematically pulling Britain back into Brussels' orbit without ever asking the public for permission. This is the playbook. During the election, Starmer and Rachel Reeves said they'd raise taxes by £8.6 billion. The real figure? £66 billion. They deliberately hid their intentions because they knew voters would reject the truth. Now they're doing the exact same thing with Europe, delivering sweeping change through stealth, betting that by the time you notice, reintegration will be irreversible. Here's the thing about betrayal. Eventually, people notice. And when they notice, they remember. The polls tell a story of collapse with no precedent in modern British history. Starmer is now officially the least popular Prime Minister ever recorded. Not just unpopular, the least popular in the entire history of polling. According to Ipsos, just 13% of voters are satisfied with his performance. 79% are dissatisfied. That's a net rating of -66. Worse than Rishi Sunak before his historic defeat. Worse than John Major at his lowest. Worse than Boris Johnson the day he resigned in disgrace. Worse than Liz Truss after she crashed the economy. No Prime Minister in nearly 50 years has ever been this despised. And the fall has been breathtakingly fast. Labour won the election with 35% of the vote in July 2024. By January 2025, they'd fallen to 26%. By the end of 2025, they were at 18%. Some polls have them as low as 17%, the lowest the party has ever scored. Meanwhile, Reform UK has surged to 34%. In some polls, they lead Labour by 12 points. They lead the Conservatives by 20. They're on course to win the next election with a majority as large as the one Labour just won. And what about the woman controlling the money? Chancellor Rachel Reeves has somehow become even more unpopular. Just 12% of voters view her favourably. 71% view her negatively. That's a net rating of -59, the worst of any chancellor on record, comparable only to Kwasi Kwarteng, after his disastrous mini-budget nearly crashed the economy in 2022. The chancellor is despised by her own supporters, and yet she remains in post, apparently the best Labour has to offer. This is the context for everything happening in British politics right now. A government that's lost the nation's confidence. A Prime Minister less popular than any leader in recorded history. A justice system releasing violent criminals while jailing people for tweets. A police force accused of treating communities differently based on background. A Brexit settlement being unpicked without consent. And rising above it all, a movement that had 5 seats 18 months ago and now leads every major poll by double digits. Reform UK isn't just winning. They're transforming British politics. They're proving the old rules no longer apply. The May elections will be the first test. Labour strategists privately admit they expect heavy losses. Reform is planning to spend big, to turn their polling lead into actual votes. If they succeed, pressure on Starmer becomes unbearable. If they win councillors and assembly members across the country, whispers about replacing him will turn into open demands. But this is about more than one unpopular Prime Minister. This is about the complete collapse of trust in the British establishment. The people running this country have spent decades telling ordinary citizens they know best. They've dismissed concerns about immigration as racism, concerns about crime as hysteria, concerns about national identity as nostalgia. And now those same ordinary citizens are responding, not with violence, not with riots, but with votes. Reform UK has become the vessel for public anger, because the established parties failed so comprehensively. The Conservatives had 14 years to control immigration. They promised tens of thousands, delivered hundreds of thousands. When voters finally threw them out, they turned to Labour expecting something different. What they got was the same policies with different rhetoric, same failures with different excuses, same contempt for ordinary concerns dressed in progressive language. That's why over 268,000 people have joined Reform UK. More than Labour, more than the Conservatives. Nigel Farage has achieved what experts said was impossible. He turned a protest movement into a genuine contender for government. He proved that when enough people feel unheard long enough, they'll create their own political force. The fight of our lives is indeed underway. But it's not the fight Starmer thinks it is. It's not progressive values against far-right extremism. It's something simpler and more powerful. The British people against a political establishment that's taken them for granted for far too long. And for the first time in generations, the people might actually win. The old politics is dying. Something new is being born. And no matter how many times Starmer flies to Europe to discuss fighting populism, he cannot stop what's coming. The British people are waking up. The question is, are you? Drop a comment below. Do you think Reform UK can actually win? Or is this just another false dawn? And if you want to stay ahead of the story the mainstream media won't touch, subscribe now. Because what happens in the next few months will determine the future of Britain for a generation. Don't miss it.